In the merciless Arizona territory of 1875, rancher Dawson Reeve discovered something that would shatter his solitary existence forever. A 4-year-old girl standing guard over her dying mother's body in the desert, armed with nothing but a stick and a scream that could wake the dead. When he said, "You're coming with me, kid," he had no idea he was starting a war that would pit him against corrupt lawyers, territorial law, and his own carefully guarded heart. Stay until the end to see how 3 broken souls became an unbreakable family, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The sun hung in the Arizona sky like a punishment from God himself, white-hot and merciless, turning the August air into something that could kill a man as surely as a bullet. Dawson Reeve had seen that kind of killing heat before, during the war, when soldiers dropped dead in their tracks with no visible wounds, just the sun's slow murder written across their faces. He'd survived that hell, and he'd survived a dozen more since then, which was why he knew better than to ride the southern cattle trail in the middle of the day. But the fence line wouldn't check itself, and the last thing he needed was losing stock to breaks he could have prevented. So here he was, 38 years old, and too damn stubborn to admit the heat was winning, his hat pulled low and his eyes fixed on the shimmering horizon where earth met sky in a watercolor blur. That's when he heard it. At first, Dawson thought it was a hawk, that high, sharp cry that desert birds made when they circled something dying. His hand went instinctively to his rifle, because where there were dying things, there were usually predators, and a smart man didn't take chances in country like this. But then the sound came again, and something about it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It wasn't a hawk, it was human. Dawson pulled his horse around so hard the gelding snorted in protest, dancing sideways as Dawson's eyes scanned the landscape. Nothing but scrub brush, scattered mesquite, and sand, miles and miles of sand that the wind pushed into drifts like snow. He was about to dismiss it as heat madness when movement caught his eye. About 40 yards off the trail, near a cluster of mesquite that offered the only shade for a quarter-mile. He saw the stick first, a pathetic little branch being waved like a sword by a tiny figure standing in the shadow of the trees. Then he saw the rags that might have once been a dress. Then he saw the child wearing them. "Jesus Christ," Dawson breathed and kicked his horse into motion. As he got closer, details emerged from the heat shimmer like a nightmare assembling itself piece by piece. The child was a girl, couldn't have been more than 4 years old, her face so covered in dust and tear tracks that she looked like a ghost. Her hair hung in matted tangles around her shoulders, and her bare feet were bleeding from a dozen small cuts. But it was her eyes that hit Dawson hardest, huge and dark and absolutely feral with terror and determination. Behind her, half buried in the blowing sand, was the body. No, not a body. A woman. And God help him, she was moving. "Stay back!" the little girl shrieked, brandishing her stick with both hands. Her voice cracked with thirst and exhaustion, but there was steel underneath it. "Don't you touch her! Don't you touch my mama!" Dawson held up both hands, keeping them visible and non-threatening as he dismounted slowly. He'd gentled enough wild horses to know that approach mattered, and this child was as wild as anything he'd ever seen. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt anybody. My name's Dawson Reeve, and I've got water and food. Looks like you and your mama could use both." "We don't need nothing from you." The girl took a step forward, putting herself more firmly between Dawson and the woman on the ground. Mama said don't trust nobody. She said wait here, and she'd wake up, and we'd go to Tucson, and everything would be... Her voice broke completely then, dissolving into a sob that she tried desperately to swallow. The stick trembled in her hands. Dawson's chest tightened in a way it hadn't in years. He'd built walls around himself after the war, after Maria died, after he'd buried enough people he loved to fill a small cemetery. Those walls had kept him safe, kept him functional, kept him from feeling much of anything for a long damn time. But this tiny, fierce, terrified child trying to protect her dying mother with a stick and sheer willpower, this got through every defense he had. "What's your name, kid?" he asked gently. The girl's lower lip trembled. "Tessa. Tessa. That's a real pretty name." Dawson took one slow step forward, watching her carefully. "Tessa, I can see you're the bravest girl in all of Arizona standing guard over your mama like this. But the truth is, she's real sick, and if we don't get her help soon, all that brave isn't going to matter. You understand what I'm saying? Tessa's eyes filled with tears that spilled over and cut new tracks through the dust on her face. She's not going to die. She promised she wouldn't leave me. She promised. Then let's make sure she keeps that promise, Dawson said. He knelt down, getting himself on her level, still a good 10 feet away. I used to be a field medic in the war, Tessa. I know how to help sick folks, but I gotta look at her first. Will you let me do that? The girl's fingers tightened on the stick until her knuckles went white. For a long moment, Dawson thought she might actually swing at him if he tried to move closer. Then, slowly, she lowered the branch. If you hurt her, Tessa whispered, I'll kill you. Despite everything, the heat, the dying woman, the desperate situation, Dawson felt one corner of his mouth twitch upward. Fair enough. He approached the woman carefully, very aware of the little girl's eyes tracking his every move. Up close, he could see that she'd been beautiful once, before dehydration and exposure had hollowed out her cheeks and cracked her lips until they bled. Her dress was torn in several places, and one of her ankles was swollen to twice its normal size. Broken or badly sprained, he couldn't tell which without a closer look. But worse than any of that was the wound he could see on her side, half hidden by her dress, where infection had set in and turned the skin around it angry red. He pressed his fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but rapid and thready, her heart working too hard to keep her body alive despite the damage. Her skin was burning hot with fever. How long has she been like this? Dawson asked, pulling his canteen from his belt. I don't know. Tessa's voice was small now, the fierceness draining away as exhaustion took over. We were in the wagon, and then the men came. They took everything. Papa tried to stop them, but they... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Dawson's jaw tightened as he wet his bandana and carefully wiped some of the dirt from the woman's face. When did the men leave? Morning, I think. The sun was different. Tessa swayed on her feet. Mama woke up after and said we had to walk to the road. But she fell down and couldn't get back up. I tried to help her. I tried and tried, but she's too heavy and I'm not strong enough. And, hey, Dawson caught the girl gently by the shoulders as she started to tip forward. You did good, Tessa. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You stayed with her and you kept watch. That's what saved her life. He eased the woman's head up slightly and dribbled a few drops of water onto her cracked lips. She didn't wake, but her throat worked reflexively, swallowing. That was something, at least. That meant her body still remembered how to fight. Is she going to die? Tessa asked in a tiny voice. Dawson looked at the child's face, at the hope and terror warring in those huge dark eyes, and knew he couldn't lie to her. Kids like this, who'd already seen too much of the world's ugliness, they could smell a lie from a mile away. She might, he said honestly. That infection's bad, and she's lost a lot of fluids. But I'll tell you something else. She's still breathing, which means she's still fighting. And if she's half as stubborn as her daughter, she's got a hell of a chance. Tessa wiped her nose on her arm. What are you going to do? I'm going to take both of you back to my ranch. It's about 5 miles northwest of here. I've got medicine there and supplies and everything we need to give your mama a fighting chance. He stood up, scanning the desert around them. No sign of the men who'd done this, but that didn't mean much. Can you ride a horse? The girl nodded. Good. You're going to sit up front and hold on tight. I'm going to carry your mama behind us. She's too heavy. I tried. I know you did. Dawson was already bending down, carefully sliding his arms under the woman's shoulders and knees. She weighed almost nothing, which was terrifying in its own way, meant she'd been starving before this happened. But I'm a lot bigger than you, and I've carried heavier loads longer distances. We'll manage. Getting everyone arranged on the horse was a feat of logistics and stubbornness. Dawson lifted Tessa into the saddle first, then carefully positioned the woman in front of her, propped against his own chest as he mounted behind them both. The gelding snorted and shifted, unhappy with the unusual load, but he was a good horse and settled after a moment. Hold on to my shirt, Dawson told Tessa, who immediately grabbed 2 fistfuls of his work shirt with her tiny hands. And don't let go, no matter what. Understand? Yes, sir. Good girl. He turned the horse toward home and kicked him into a careful walk. Every step was calculated, fast enough to matter, slow enough not to jostle his unconscious passenger too badly. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the frightening heat of her fever through both their clothes. 5 miles had never seemed so far. They rode in silence for the first mile, Dawson's eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of the men Tessa had mentioned. Bandits were common in this part of the territory, men made desperate or mean by the harsh land, who took what they wanted and left their victims for the desert to clean up. The war had made too many men comfortable with killing, and the lawless territories attracted them like flies to carrion. "Mr. Reeve," Tessa's voice was barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "Call me Dawson, kid." "Dawson, is your ranch nice?" He thought about his small, rough cabin with its patched roof and perpetually dusty floors, the barn that needed a new door, the fence lines he'd been meaning to repair for months. Nice wasn't exactly the word for it. "It's solid," he said instead. "Got 4 walls and a roof that doesn't leak much. Got a well with good water and a stove that works. It ain't fancy, but it's home." "Do you have a wife?" "No." "Kids?" "No." "Why not?" Dawson's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "That's a complicated question for a little girl to be asking." "Mama says I ask too many questions." "Your mama sounds like a smart woman." He adjusted his grip on the woman, Tessa's mama, as she stirred slightly. "What's her name?" "Maribel. Maribel Rose Lane. She's real pretty when she's not sick. She sings sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. She has the prettiest voice in the whole world." The way Tessa talked about her mother, present tense, like the woman was just sleeping and would wake up any minute, made Dawson's chest ache. He'd seen enough death to know the difference between probably and possibly, and Maribel Lane was skating the razor's edge between them. "Tell me about your papa," he said, partly to keep the girl talking and awake, partly because he needed to know what kind of situation he was stepping into. The war had taught him to gather intelligence first and act second. Tessa was quiet for a long moment. "Papa died last winter. Got sick with the fever that was going around. Mama tried everything, all her medicines and teas and poultices, but nothing worked. He just went to sleep one day and didn't wake up." "I'm sorry, kid." "Mama cried a lot. She tried to hide it, but I heard her at night. Then some men came and said we had to leave our house because Papa owed money to the bank. Mama said we'd go to Tucson where her sister lives. We sold almost everything to buy the wagon and supplies. But then those men came and—" Her voice trailed off into something that might have been a sob or might have been just exhaustion. Dawson let the silence stretch, giving her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. The sun was starting its slow descent toward the horizon when Dawson's ranch finally came into view, a small cluster of buildings huddled against the landscape like they were trying to hide from the desert's fury. It wasn't much, but it was his, paid for with blood money from the war and maintained through sheer stubborn determination. "Almost there," he said, mostly to himself. Tessa had gone quiet and still against him, but he could feel her grip on his shirt hadn't loosened. The kid had backbone. He'd give her that. Most children her age would have been hysterical hours ago. He guided the horse up to the cabin and dismounted carefully, easing Maribel down with him. She was completely limp now, her breathing shallow and irregular. Not good. Not good at all. "Tessa, hop down and open that door for me," Dawson ordered, already moving toward the cabin with Maribel in his arms. The girl slid down from the saddle and ran ahead, struggling with the heavy wooden door until it swung open. Dawson carried Maribel inside and laid her on his own bed, the only bed in the cabin. It wasn't much, just a simple frame with a cornhusk mattress, but it was clean and it would do. "Light the lamp on that table," he told Tessa, already moving to the stove to get water boiling. "Then bring it over here so I can see what I'm working with." The next hour was a blur of activity. Dawson stripped away the torn, filthy dress, noting with clinical detachment the dozens of bruises and cuts that covered Maribel's body. The infected wound on her side was worse than he'd thought, a deep gash that someone had tried to stitch but had done a poor job of it. He could see the red lines of blood poisoning spreading from the wound like spider legs. He cleaned it first with whiskey that made Maribel moan and thrash even in her unconscious state. Tessa stood at the foot of the bed, her eyes huge and terrified, but she didn't run and she didn't look away. "Talk to her," Dawson said as he worked, heating his knife blade in the lamp flame. "She might be able to hear you. Let her know you're here." "Mama?" Tessa's voice shook. "Mama, it's me. It's Tessa. You're going to be okay. This man, Dawson, he's helping you. He's real nice, Mama. He found us in the desert, and he brought us to his house, and he's making you better. So you just got to hang on, okay? You got to keep your promise. You promised you wouldn't leave me. You promised." Dawson had to cut away the bad stitches and clean the wound properly, digging out bits of dirt and debris that had festered inside. Maribel screamed then, a raw, agonized sound that brought tears streaming down Tessa's face. But Dawson didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If he didn't clean it now, the infection would kill her within days. When he was finally satisfied that he'd gotten everything out, he stitched the wound closed again with steady hands that remembered this ugly work from field hospitals where men screamed and died on blood-soaked tables. He'd hated it then. He hated it now. But he was good at it, and that's what mattered. He wrapped the wound in clean bandages, then turned his attention to the fever. That was the real killer now, the infection spreading through her blood, burning her from the inside out. He packed her in cool, wet cloths and forced water down her throat, a few drops at a time. "Is she going to wake up?" Tessa asked in a small voice. Maybe. Maybe not for a while. Dawson looked at the girl, really looked at her for the first time since they'd arrived. She was swaying on her feet, her eyes glazed with exhaustion. "When's the last time you ate?" Tessa frowned, like she had to think about it. "I don't remember." "Come on, kid, let's get some food in you." He fixed her a plate of beans and bacon, simple food, but hot and filling. She ate mechanically, her eyes constantly darting to the bed where her mother lay motionless. When she was done, Dawson pointed to the chair beside the bed. "You can sleep there if you want. I'll be right over at the table, and I'll be checking on her all night. If anything changes, I'll wake you. Deal?" Tessa nodded and curled up in the chair, her head resting on the edge of the mattress near her mother's hand. Within minutes, she was asleep, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Dawson pulled another chair over to the table and sat where he could see both of them. He had a clear view of Maribel's chest rising and falling, could hear the rasp of her breathing. Every hour, he got up and checked her pulse, changed the wet cloths, tried to get more water into her. The night stretched long and dark. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, and the wind rattled the windows in their frames. Inside, Dawson kept his vigil, counting pulse beats and breaths, watching for any sign that the fever was breaking or that the infection was winning. Around midnight, Maribel began to thrash and moan, her head turning from side to side as the fever drove her into delirium. "No," she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred. "Don't. Please don't. Tessa. Where's Tessa?" "Mama?" The girl jerked awake, instantly alert despite her exhaustion. "Mama, I'm here." "Stay away from her." Maribel's eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. "Don't touch her. Don't you dare." "Ma'am, you're safe," Dawson said firmly, moving to the bedside. "Your daughter's safe. You're at my ranch. Nobody's going to hurt either of you." But Maribel was beyond hearing. She tried to sit up, crying out when the movement pulled at her stitches. Dawson had to hold her shoulders down gently but firmly, keeping her from tearing herself open again. "Tessa, talk to her," he ordered. "Mama, it's okay." Tessa was crying now, her small hands trying to reach for her mother. "Mama, we're safe. We're at Dawson's house and he helped you, and we're safe now, Mama, please." Something in Tessa's voice must have gotten through because Maribel suddenly went still. Her eyes, still fever-bright and confused, focused on her daughter's face. "Tessa?" she whispered. "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here. I told you to run. I couldn't leave you, Mama. I wouldn't." Maribel's eyes filled with tears that spilled over and ran into her hair. "My brave girl, my brave, brave girl." Then her eyes rolled back and she was unconscious again, her body going limp against the pillows. Tessa let out a sob that seemed too big for her small body. Dawson acted on instinct, reaching over and pulling the child into his arms. She buried her face in his shirt and cried, huge gulping sobs that shook her whole frame. He held her awkwardly, one hand patting her back in a rhythm he dimly remembered from some long ago time when he'd known how to comfort people. She knew me, Tessa hiccuped against his chest. She knew me, Dawson. Yeah, kid, she did. That means she's going to be okay, right? If she knew me, that means she's fighting? Dawson looked at Maribel's pale, motionless face and chose his words carefully. It means she's still in there, still fighting. That's a good sign. But she's got a hard road ahead of her, Tessa. You need to understand that. The girl pulled back and looked up at him with those huge, solemn eyes. I understand, but she's strong. She's the strongest person I know. I believe you, Dawson said, and realized he meant it. He settled Tessa back in the chair and returned to his watch. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, every change in Maribel's breathing. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, he felt like he'd been dragged behind a horse for miles. But Maribel was still breathing. Her pulse was still there, still too fast but not getting worse. The infection wasn't retreating, but it wasn't advancing either. It was a stalemate, and in medicine, sometimes a stalemate was the best you could hope for. Dawson made coffee and watched the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and red. Tessa stirred in her chair, blinking awake with the automatic wariness of a child who'd learned that safety was temporary. She's still breathing, Dawson said before the girl could ask. No better, no worse. That's not bad for the first night. Tessa scrambled out of the chair and pressed her small hand against her mother's forehead. She's so hot. Fever's still burning. We'll keep her cool and keep pushing fluids. That's all we can do right now. Can I help? Dawson looked at the little girl, at her matted hair and dirty face and clothes that were little more than rags, and made a decision. Yeah, you can help. First thing, you're going to get yourself cleaned up. There's a wash basin outside and some old shirts in that trunk over there that you can wear until we can get you proper clothes. Then you can help me change these bandages. For the next 3 days and nights, they fell into a routine. Dawson would check Maribel every hour, forcing water and thin broth down her throat whenever she was conscious enough to swallow. Tessa appointed herself chief handholder and storyteller, sitting beside the bed and recounting every memory she had of happier times. Remember when Papa took us to the fair in Santa Fe, Mama? Remember how you won that blue ribbon for your apple pie? And Papa was so proud he told everyone we met, even though you kept telling him to hush? And remember how we rode the carousel, and you let me go twice because Papa slipped the man an extra coin? Dawson listened to these stories as he worked, mending fence, tending stock, keeping the household running while simultaneously playing nurse. He learned that Maribel had been a teacher before she married, that she could read Latin and knew more about plants and healing than most doctors, that she'd lost 2 babies before Tessa was born and had almost died bringing Tessa into the world. He learned that Tessa's father, Jacob Lane, had been a good man who'd tried to build a life for his family but had been defeated by bad luck and worse timing, that the bank that foreclosed on their home had been run by a man who'd made several unwanted advances toward Maribel and who'd seemed pleased to have an excuse to push them out. He learned that they'd been heading to Tucson to stay with Maribel's sister, a widow with 4 children of her own, who probably didn't have room for 2 more mouths to feed but would make room anyway because that's what family did. And he learned that Tessa could sing, not as well as her mother apparently could, but sweet and clear and achingly hopeful as she hummed lullabies to the woman who might or might not be able to hear them. On the 4th day, something changed. Dawson was outside splitting wood when he heard Tessa scream. He dropped the axe and ran, his heart hammering, certain he was about to find Maribel had taken her last breath while he wasn't watching. Instead, he burst through the door to find Tessa laughing and crying at the same time, and Maribel, pale and weak but unmistakably conscious, staring around the cabin with confused, fever-bright eyes. Where? Maribel's voice was barely a croak. Where am I? Dawson's house! Tessa was bouncing on her toes, her whole face lit up with joy. Mama, you're awake! You're really awake! Maribel's eyes found Dawson standing in the doorway. For a moment, pure terror flashed across her face, a wounded creature's instinctive fear of any man she didn't know. Her hand shot out and grabbed Tessa, pulling the girl closer with what little strength she had. Don't, she gasped. Please don't hurt her. Take anything you want, but please don't. Ma'am. Dawson held up both hands, making himself as non-threatening as possible. Ma'am, you're safe here. Safe. Both of you. I found you in the desert 4 days ago, half dead from infection and exposure. I brought you here to help. That's all. Maribel's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the clean bandages on her side, the water basin beside the bed, the evidence of careful nursing. Then her gaze dropped to Tessa, who was clean and wearing one of Dawson's old shirts belted at the waist like a dress. Tessa? Baby, are you all right? I'm fine, Mama. Dawson helped us. He saved your life. Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought you were going to die, Mama. I thought you were going to become an angel and leave me all alone. Maribel pulled her daughter into her arms, ignoring the pain the movement caused. She buried her face in Tessa's hair and wept, great shuddering sobs that shook her thin frame. Dawson quietly backed out of the cabin, giving them privacy for their reunion. He stood on the porch and stared out at the desert, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. 4 days he'd fought to keep that woman alive, 4 days of watching and waiting and wondering if she'd open her eyes or just slip away in her sleep. She'd opened her eyes. That meant he'd won this round against death. He should have felt satisfied, relieved at least. Instead, he just felt tired, bone-deep, soul-weary tired that had nothing to do with missed sleep and everything to do with letting himself care about someone again. He'd forgotten how much caring could cost. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open. He turned to find Maribel standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame for support. Up close, with her eyes clear and aware, he could see what Tessa had meant about her being pretty. Even wasted by fever and hardship, there was something striking about her face, strong bones and expressive eyes that had probably laughed a lot once upon a time. Thank you, she said simply. Tessa told me everything. What you did, how you found us, how you've been caring for me. Her voice broke. Thank you for saving my daughter's life. Saved yours too, Dawson pointed out. Yes, but if you'd only found her, if you'd taken her and left me, she swallowed hard. At least she would have been safe. That's all that matters. Dawson studied her face, the fierce maternal love written in every line, the bone-deep exhaustion, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. You should get back to bed. You're in no shape to be up. I needed to see you, needed to... She wavered on her feet, and Dawson stepped forward quickly to catch her elbow. Needed to make sure you were real, that this wasn't just a fever dream before I died. You're not dying, not on my watch. He guided her back to the bed, ignoring the way she stiffened at his touch. But you are going to rest and recover, because that infection damn near killed you, and it's going to take time to heal. Maribel let him help her back into bed, her face gray with pain. I don't have time. We need to get to Tucson. Your sister can wait. You're not traveling anywhere for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. We can't stay here that long. We've already imposed too much. She looked around the small cabin with obvious distress. This is your bed. Where have you been sleeping? Floor's fine. It's not fine. We can't, ma'am. Dawson's voice came out sharper than he intended. With respect, you don't get a vote right now. You were dying 4 days ago. Hell, you were half dead when I found you. Your daughter kept you alive through sheer stubbornness, and I kept you alive through every trick I learned in the war. But you're not out of danger yet. That wound could still go bad. The fever could come back, and if you try to leave before you're healed, all we did was delay the inevitable. Maribel's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, remembering another woman who'd died because he hadn't been there to help her. Another child who'd never gotten the chance to grow up. Ghosts that haunted him every day of his life. Maybe that's exactly why, he said finally. Now rest. Doctor's orders. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. What do I call you? Tessa keeps saying Dawson, but that seems presumptuous. Dawson's fine. Dawson Reeve, formerly of the Army Medical Corps, currently of nowhere in particular. He glanced back at her. And you're Maribel Rose Lane, Tessa told me. She talks a lot. She does. Save both your lives, that talking. Kept me informed while I was trying to figure out how to help you. Maribel smiled, just a little. She's a good girl. Best I've ever met. Dawson said it with complete sincerity. Now sleep, before I dose you with laudanum. This time when he left the cabin, Maribel didn't stop him. He stood on the porch and watched the sun continue its arc across the sky, aware that everything had just gotten a lot more complicated. He'd saved their lives. That part was done. Now came the hard part, figuring out what happened next. The first full day of Maribel's consciousness brought a tension to the cabin that Dawson hadn't anticipated. She was awake, yes, and lucid, but she watched him with the wary eyes of a cornered animal every time he came near. When he needed to check her bandages or help her take water, she would go rigid, her jaw clenched so tight he could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. Tessa noticed it too. The girl had planted herself between them like a tiny diplomat, chattering constantly to fill the uncomfortable silences. Dawson makes real good beans, Mama, better than the ones we had on the trail, and he let me feed the chickens this morning. There's 6 of them, and they have funny names. That one with the black spot is called Pepper, and she's mean as a snake, but Dawson says she lays the best eggs. Maribel managed a weak smile for her daughter, but her eyes never left Dawson as he moved around the cabin, preparing a thin soup that her stomach might be able to handle. By the second day, Dawson had had enough. He waited until Tessa was outside gathering eggs, then pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down with his arms crossed. Maribel immediately tensed, her hand creeping toward the knife he knew she'd hidden under her pillow, the small paring knife from his kitchen that had gone missing yesterday. "We need to talk," Dawson said flatly. "About what?" Maribel's voice was steadier now, gaining strength as her body slowly healed. "About the fact that you look at me like I'm about to attack you every time I get within 10 feet. About that knife you stole from my kitchen. About whatever the hell happened to you that's got you so scared of a man who's done nothing but try to help." Color rose in Maribel's pale cheeks. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The hell you don't." Dawson leaned forward, keeping his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, I understand you've been through something terrible. I can see it written all over you. The way you flinch when I move too fast. The way you position yourself so you can see the door at all times. The way you pull Tessa close whenever I'm in the room. I'm not stupid, and I'm not blind. But here's the thing. I'm not whatever man or men put that fear in you, and I need you to understand that because we can't keep living like this." Maribel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice came out steady. "How am I supposed to trust you? I wake up in a strange man's house, in his bed, wearing clothes I don't remember putting on. My daughter tells me you've been caring for me for days while I was unconscious. Do you have any idea how that feels? How vulnerable that makes me?" "I can imagine," Dawson said quietly. "And if I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same way. But let me be clear about something. I undressed you only as much as necessary to treat your wounds, and Tessa was here the whole time. I've slept on the floor every night. I haven't touched you except to provide medical care, and I sure as hell haven't done anything to deserve being treated like a monster in my own home." "I never said you were a monster. You didn't have to. Your eyes say it every time you look at me." He sat back, suddenly tired. "Look, I'm not asking you to trust me. I know trust has to be earned, but I am asking you to at least consider the possibility that not every man in this territory is out to hurt you." Maribel was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. "The men who attacked us," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were 3 of them. They came at dawn when we were making breakfast. They wanted the wagon, the supplies, everything. My husband, Jacob, he tried to fight them. They shot him and left him to die in the desert like he was nothing, like his life meant nothing." Dawson felt his jaw tighten. "I'm sorry. They took everything, the wagon, the horses, our money, our food. One of them," her voice broke, "one of them said I was too pretty to leave behind. Said maybe they'd take me too, have some fun before they killed me. I grabbed Tessa and ran. I don't even remember which direction, just ran until my legs gave out. They chased us for a while, laughing like it was a game. Then I fell, tripped over a rock, and went down hard. Hit my side on something sharp. They were right behind us, and I thought they were going to..." She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. "But they didn't," Dawson said gently. They left you there. One of them wanted to finish it. I heard him arguing with the others, but another one said it wasn't worth the bullet, that the desert would do their work for them. They rode away and I couldn't move. Couldn't make myself stand back up. I told Tessa to run, to find the road, to find help. But she wouldn't leave me. No, Dawson agreed, remembering the fierce little girl with her stick and her determination. She wouldn't. Maribel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So you see why I'm afraid? Why I can't just accept that you're different? For all I know, you could be working with them. This could all be some elaborate plan to what? Dawson interrupted. To nurse you back to health? To feed your daughter and give you a safe place to recover? If I wanted to hurt you, ma'am, I had 4 days while you were unconscious to do it. I had 100 chances and I took none of them. At some point, you're going to have to accept that maybe, just maybe, I'm exactly what I appear to be. A man who found 2 people dying in the desert and decided to help. Maribel stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Why? She asked. Why did you help us? It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time Dawson heard the real question underneath it, the one she was really asking. Why would you help us when everyone else has hurt us? Why would you be different? I had a wife once, Dawson heard himself say, the words coming before he could stop them. Maria. She died 7 years ago trying to birth our son. He died too, came out blue, and never took a breath. I was 2 days' ride away, checking on a cattle herd when it happened. By the time I got home, they were both already in the ground. Maribel's expression softened. I'm so sorry. The midwife told me Maria called for me at the end, kept asking where I was, when I'd be home. She died thinking I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. Dawson's voice was rough. I've spent 7 years knowing that if I'd been there, if I'd just been home instead of chasing money, maybe I could have saved them. Maybe everything would have been different. You can't know that. No, I can't, but I know I wasn't there when it mattered. So when I found you and Tessa out there in the desert, when I saw that little girl trying to protect her dying mother with a stick. He shook his head. I couldn't not help. Do you understand? I physically could not ride away and leave you there, not again. Understanding bloomed in Maribel's eyes, followed by something that might have been sympathy or might have been shared grief. The recognition of one broken person seeing their own pain reflected in another. I'm sorry, she said softly, for your loss, and for how I've been treating you. You're right. You've done nothing but help us, and I've repaid that kindness with suspicion and fear. You don't owe me an apology. Fear's a reasonable response to what you've been through. Dawson stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with how much he'd revealed. I just need you to know you're safe here. Both of you, for as long as you need to stay. We can't stay long, Maribel said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. My sister in Tucson will still be there in 3 weeks. Right now you can barely sit up without turning gray. You're in no condition to travel. I'm getting stronger every day. You're getting slightly less weak every day. There's a difference. Dawson moved toward the door, then paused. And ma'am, that knife under your pillow? Keep it. If it makes you feel safer, then keep it. Just know you won't need it. Not here. He left before she could respond, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine, where Tessa was trying to convince a hen to give up its egg. Stupid chicken, the girl muttered, reaching carefully into the nesting box. Dawson says you're supposed to be nice to me, but you just want to peck and… Ouch! You did it again! Despite everything, Dawson felt his mouth twitch into something almost like a smile. Try talking to her softer. Pepper responds better to sweet talk than to commands. Tessa gave him a skeptical look. Chickens don't understand talking. Maybe not, but they understand tone. Try it. The girl turned back to the nesting box and pitched her voice into a sugary sweetness that was almost comical. Okay, Miss Pepper, I'm just going to reach in here real gentle-like and take that egg you don't even want anyway, and in return I'll give you extra feed tonight. How's that sound? The hen clucked but didn't peck as Tessa's small hand closed around the egg and drew it out triumphantly. I did it! Dawson, did you see? I got the egg without getting pecked. I saw. You're a natural. Tessa beamed at him, then her expression grew serious. Dawson, Is my mama going to be okay? Really okay, I mean. Not just yes because you think I can't handle the truth. The kid was too perceptive for her own good. Dawson crouched down so they were eye to eye. Honestly? She's doing better than I expected. The fever's stayed down for 2 days now, which is a good sign. The wound is healing clean. If she keeps improving at this rate, she'll be strong enough to travel in a few weeks. And then we have to leave. It wasn't a question, but Dawson heard the uncertainty in it, the unspoken question of whether she wanted to leave. That's up to your mama, he said carefully. This isn't your home, Tessa. You know that. I know, but... She looked down at the egg in her hands. It's nice here. You're nice. And nobody's trying to hurt us or take things from us or make Mama cry. I like it here. Something in Dawson's chest constricted painfully. I like having you here too, kid. But your mama's got family waiting for her in Tucson. That's where you belong. What if we belong here instead? Tessa. I'm just saying, what if we stayed? Mama could teach school. She's real good at teaching. And I could help with the chickens and the garden and whatever else needs doing. We wouldn't be in the way. We'd earn our keep. That's not the point, Dawson started to say. But Tessa was on a roll now. Papa used to say that home isn't a place, it's people. He said home is wherever the people you love are. Well, I love Mama, and I love... She stopped, her eyes going wide as if she'd just realized what she was about to say. I mean, I really like it here. That's all I meant. Dawson felt like he'd been punched in the chest. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he say? That he'd started to care about them too? That the cabin felt less empty with their presence in it? That he'd lain awake the past 2 nights listening to Tessa's soft breathing and Maribel's occasional murmurs, and had felt something he thought was dead stir back to life? He couldn't say any of those things. Not to a child, not when her mother was probably already planning their departure. Let's just focus on getting your mama well, he said finally. The rest will sort itself out. But as he watched Tessa carry her egg basket back toward the cabin, Dawson had the sinking feeling that nothing was going to sort itself out easily. The days developed a rhythm after that conversation. Maribel slowly grew stronger, able to sit up for longer periods, then to stand with support, then to take a few shuffling steps around the cabin while leaning heavily on the table. Dawson watched her progress with the clinical eye of a medic, but also with something warmer that he refused to examine too closely. She was beautiful when she wasn't half dead from fever. The hollows in her cheeks were filling out as she regained weight, and the terror had faded from her eyes, replaced by a cautious hope. She smiled more now, especially when Tessa said something funny or when Dawson brought in fresh eggs for breakfast. She also started to talk, really talk, telling stories about her life before everything fell apart. About growing up in Ohio with 3 sisters and parents who'd believed education was important, even for girls. About meeting Jacob at a church social and knowing within 5 minutes that she'd marry him. About the joy of Tessa's birth after so much loss and the terror of almost dying to bring her into the world. The midwife said I shouldn't have any more children, Maribel said one evening as Dawson changed her bandages. Tessa was outside chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. She said my body couldn't take another pregnancy. Jacob was relieved, I think. He loved Tessa so much, and the thought of losing me or having another baby die. She trailed off, her eyes distant. We were content with just her. She was enough. More than enough. She's a good kid, Dawson said, keeping his hand steady as he worked. The wound was healing beautifully now, pink and clean with no sign of infection. Another week, and she'd be able to move without pain. She's getting attached to you, Maribel said quietly. I know. That's going to make leaving harder. I know that too. Maribel caught his wrist gently as he reached for the fresh bandage. Is it going to be hard for you when we leave? Dawson met her eyes and saw the question behind the question. She was asking if he felt it too, this strange, fragile thing that was building between all 3 of them. This sense of rightness that shouldn't exist between strangers, but somehow did. Yes, he said simply, it's going to be hard. We could stay longer, if you wanted. I could help around the house, earn our keep until we've saved enough money to... No. The word came out harsher than he'd intended. Maribel flinched and pulled her hand back. I mean, Dawson tried again, you don't need to earn anything. You're guests here, not servants. And when you're ready to leave, you'll leave because it's the right time, not because you've worked off some imaginary debt. Then why did you say no? If it's going to be hard for both of us when we go, why not let us stay a bit longer? Because the longer you stay, the harder it will be to let you go, Dawson thought, but didn't say. Because I'm already halfway to caring about you both more than is wise, and every extra day makes it worse. Because I'm starting to imagine things that can't be. Like Tessa growing up here, learning to ride and rope and laugh. Like you sitting at my table every morning, your hair loose around your shoulders, smiling at me over coffee. Like having a family again when I swore I'd never let myself want that. Because you have a sister waiting for you, he said instead. Because Tucson has opportunities this ranch doesn't. Schools for Tessa, a community, other families. What do I have to offer? A rough cabin, hard work, and isolation. You and Tessa deserve better than that. Maribel stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're wrong, she said softly. About what? About what we deserve. About what you have to offer. She gestured around the small cabin. This place, it's the first time in months that I've felt safe. Really safe. Not just protected, but at peace. Tessa feels it too. She hasn't had nightmares once since we've been here. Do you know how often she woke up screaming on the trail? Every single night, Dawson. Every single night I had to hold her while she cried about the men who killed her father and the monsters she was sure would come back for us. She's a child. She'll have nightmares anywhere after what she's been through. She doesn't have them here, Maribel insisted, because here she knows someone is watching over us. Someone strong enough to keep the monsters away. Dawson finished tying off the bandage and stood up abruptly, needing distance from the intensity in her eyes. I'm not a hero, ma'am. I'm just a man who did what anyone would have done. But not everyone would have, Maribel said. Those men who attacked us, they left us to die. They could have helped, could have shown mercy. They chose cruelty instead. You chose kindness. That's not nothing, Dawson. Before he could respond, Tessa burst through the door, her hands cupped carefully around something. Mama! Dawson! Look what I caught! She opened her hands to reveal a firefly, its abdomen glowing with soft yellow light. That's beautiful, baby, Maribel said, smiling. But you should let it go. It needs to find its family. What if it doesn't have a family? Tessa asked. What if it's all alone? Then it will find a new family, Maribel said gently. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you lose the family you were born with and have to make a new one. Tessa looked at the firefly thoughtfully, then walked to the door and released it into the night. All three of them watched it fly away, its light blinking as it rose toward the stars. Do you think we'll find a new family, Mama? Tessa asked. When we get to Aunt Catherine's? I think we'll have family there, yes. But what about here? Aren't we family here too? The three of us? The question hung in the air like the firefly's fading light. Dawson felt both sets of eyes turn toward him, waiting for his answer. You should get to bed, kid, he said, instead of answering. It's late. Disappointment flickered across Tessa's face, but she nodded and went to the chair where she'd been sleeping, though lately, more often than not, she ended up curled at the foot of her mother's bed by morning. That night, Dawson lay on his bedroll on the floor and listened to the soft sounds of the two people who'd invaded his life and turned everything upside down. He heard Maribel's breathing even out into sleep. He heard Tessa whisper something and Maribel's drowsy response. He heard the wind outside and the distant cry of coyotes and the familiar creaks of his cabin settling. And he let himself imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like if they stayed, if this became permanent instead of temporary. If he got to watch Tessa grow up and teach her everything he knew about this hard, beautiful land. If he got to fall asleep every night knowing Maribel was safe and cared for under his roof. If he got to have a family again, even if it wasn't the family he'd lost. The thought terrified him almost as much as it appealed to him. The next morning brought a visitor. Dawson was in the barn when he heard the horse approaching. He grabbed his rifle out of habit. Visitors were rare this far out, and unexpected ones were usually trouble. But when he stepped out into the yard, he recognized the rider immediately. Samuel Ortiz was the closest thing to a neighbor Dawson had, his ranch about 15 miles to the east. He was a good man, honest and hardworking, with a wife and 6 children who he somehow managed to feed despite the harsh land. He and Dawson had helped each other out over the years, lending tools, sharing news from town, watching each other's stock when one of them had to travel. "Samuel," Dawson greeted him, lowering the rifle. "What brings you out this way?" "Wanted to check on you," Samuel said, dismounting. "Haven't seen you in town for a couple weeks. Margaret was getting worried you'd fallen and broken something, with no one around to help." "Still in one piece. Been busy is all." "Busy with what?" Samuel's eyes had drifted past Dawson to the cabin, where Tessa had just appeared in the doorway, her eyes going wide at the sight of a stranger. "It's a long story," Dawson said. "I've got time." So Dawson told him, a condensed version of finding Maribel and Tessa in the desert, bringing them home, fighting the fever and infection. He left out the parts about how Maribel made him feel when she smiled, or how Tessa had started to look at him like he hung the moon, or how the thought of them leaving made his chest tight. Samuel listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. When Dawson finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's quite a rescue," he said finally. "Just did what needed doing. And now, what's your plan?" "Once she's healed enough to travel, I'll take them to Tucson. She's got family there." "And that's what you want? To send them away?" Dawson felt his jaw tighten. "What I want doesn't matter. It's what's best for them." "Is it, though?" Samuel crossed his arms. "My friend, I've known you for 5 years. In all that time, I've never seen you look at anyone the way you just looked at that cabin when the little girl appeared, like you were afraid and hopeful at the same time. You're seeing things that aren't there." "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got a woman and child under your roof, and you're already thinking about how empty the place will be when they're gone." "Samuel, I'm not judging Dawson. I'm just saying maybe you should think about what you really want before you make decisions you can't take back." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Margaret wanted me to tell you we're having a gathering next Sunday after church. Nothing fancy, just food and music and neighbors. You should bring them. Let the ladies meet this woman you saved. Let the girl play with some kids her own age. I don't think about it at least. It would do them good to be around people again. And it would do you good to stop hiding out here like a hermit." Samuel mounted his horse. "We worry about you, my friend. Ever since Maria died, you've been half alive. Maybe these 2 are exactly what you need to remember what living feels like." He rode away before Dawson could respond, leaving him standing in the yard with too many thoughts crowding his head. When Dawson walked back to the cabin, he found Maribel standing just inside the door, close enough that she'd probably heard everything. "You told him about us," she said. "Had to. Samuel's a good man and a good friend. I don't lie to him." "I heard what he said about the gathering." Maribel fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, one of Dawson's old work shirts that she'd been wearing because she had no other clothes. "Would you really take us, or were you planning to make excuses?" "I was planning to make excuses," Dawson admitted. "You're not ready for that much activity." "I could be ready by Sunday, if I worked at it." She met his eyes. "I'd like to go, Dawson. I'd like Tessa to be around other children, see other families, and I'd like—" She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. "You'd like what?" "I'd like to stop hiding. I've been hiding since Jacob died, hiding from the world, from other people, from the future. Maybe it's time to stop." Dawson wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the reasons why it was too soon, too dangerous, too much, but the hope in her eyes stopped him. "All right," he heard himself say. "Sunday. But we leave if you get tired or if your side starts hurting. Deal?" The smile she gave him could have lit up the whole desert. "Deal." Sunday morning arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that made a man forget how brutal the desert could be. The sky stretched endless and blue, and a breeze carried the scent of sage and dust through the open cabin door. Dawson had been up since before dawn, running through his mental checklist with the nervous energy of a man who hadn't socialized in months, and wasn't entirely sure he remembered how. Maribel was stronger now, able to move around the cabin without wincing, though Dawson noticed she still pressed her hand to her side when she thought no one was watching. She'd spent the past 3 days working on her appearance with an intensity that told him this gathering meant more to her than she'd let on. She'd washed her hair until it shone, mended her tattered dress as best she could, and somehow managed to make herself look presentable despite having almost nothing to work with. Tessa was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on her toes as Dawson hitched the wagon. Will there be other kids there? How many kids? Do you think they'll like me? What if they don't like me? Mama says I talk too much, and sometimes kids don't like that, but I can't help it when I'm nervous. I just start talking and… Tessa, breathe, Maribel said gently, running her fingers through her daughter's hair one more time. They'll love you. Just be yourself. But what if myself isn't good enough? Dawson paused in checking the harness and looked at the little girl who'd somehow carved out a space in his carefully guarded heart. Kid, you stood guard over your dying mother in the desert with nothing but a stick and sheer determination. You're plenty good enough. Tessa's face broke into a smile that made the anxiety in Dawson's chest ease slightly. At least one of them was happy about this expedition. The ride to the Ortiz ranch took just under an hour, and with every mile, Dawson felt his discomfort growing. He hadn't been to a social gathering since Maria died. Hadn't wanted to face the pitying looks, the careful questions, the well-meaning but painful condolences. He'd built his isolation carefully, one declined invitation at a time, until people stopped asking and left him alone with his grief. Now here he was, voluntarily walking back into the world, bringing two people who depended on him into a situation he couldn't control. What if someone said something that upset Maribel? What if the other children were cruel to Tessa? What if… You're thinking too loud, Maribel said from beside him. Dawson glanced at her, startled. What? You get this crease right here. She touched her own forehead between her eyebrows. When you're worrying about something, you've had it since we left your ranch. I'm not worrying. Liar. But she said it gently, almost fondly. It's going to be fine, Dawson. We'll meet some people, eat some food, and come home. That's all. You say that like it's simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. Before Dawson could respond, Tessa let out a squeal from where she sat in the back of the wagon. Look, I can see people. And there's a swing. Mama, there's a swing hanging from that big tree. The Ortiz ranch came into view, a sprawling collection of buildings that spoke of a large, busy family. Unlike Dawson's solitary cabin, this place was alive with activity. Children ran between the buildings, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Women clustered near tables laden with food, their bright dresses adding splashes of color to the dusty landscape. Men gathered around a corral where someone was showing off a new horse. Samuel spotted them immediately and came striding over, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. Dawson, you actually came. Margaret said you'd find an excuse. He turned to Maribel with a slight bow. Ma'am, I'm Samuel Ortiz. Welcome to our home. Maribel Lane, she said, accepting his offered hand. Thank you for inviting us. And this must be the brave little girl I've heard about. Samuel crouched down to Tessa's level. My children are around back. Why don't you go introduce yourself? My youngest, Rosa, is about your age. I bet she'd love to show you the swing. Tessa looked to her mother for permission. Maribel hesitated, and Dawson could see the war playing out on her face, the desire to let her daughter play and be normal warring with the fear of letting her out of sight. Go ahead, baby, Maribel said finally. Stay where I can see you. They watched Tessa run toward the other children, her initial shyness evaporating the moment a little girl with dark braids grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the swing. Come, Samuel said. Let me introduce you to everyone. Margaret's been dying to meet the woman who finally got Dawson to attend a social function. The next hour was a blur of names and faces. Margaret Ortiz was a warm, round woman with kind eyes and hands that never stopped moving, adjusting food, smoothing children's hair, welcoming newcomers. She took one look at Maribel's mended dress and disappeared into the house, returning with an armful of clothes. These belonged to my sister before she moved to California, Margaret said, pressing them into Maribel's arms despite her protests. They're just taking up space in my trunk. You'd be doing me a favor by taking them off my hands. I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will. A woman needs more than one dress, especially out here where everything gets dusty within 5 minutes of putting it on. Margaret's voice softened. Samuel told me a bit about what happened to you and your daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lane. Thank you, Maribel said quietly. And please call me Maribel. Only if you call me Margaret. Now come, let me introduce you to the other women. Fair warning, they're going to ask 1,000 questions because nothing exciting ever happens out here, and you're the most interesting thing to arrive in months. Dawson found himself pulled into the circle of men, fielding questions about his stock, the state of the range, and the weather, with the easy rhythm of conversations that had been happening between ranchers for generations. But every few minutes, his eyes would drift to where Maribel stood with the women, watching for any sign that she was uncomfortable or in pain. "You've got it bad," a voice said beside him. Dawson turned to find Thomas Reed, a rancher from the northern boundary, grinning at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. That's why you've looked over at her 6 times in the last 5 minutes. Thomas took a drink from his cup. "Can't say I blame you. She's a lovely woman. And that little girl of hers is charming. My wife's already half in love with her." "They're just staying with me until she's healed enough to travel," Dawson said stiffly. "Then they're going to Tucson to stay with family." "That's so. Seems a shame. You could use some life around that lonely ranch of yours." "My ranch isn't lonely." Thomas just laughed and walked away, leaving Dawson to contemplate exactly when his private business had become community entertainment. The afternoon passed in a haze of food and conversation. Dawson found himself relaxing despite his earlier anxiety, slipping back into the rhythms of community that he'd forgotten he missed. These were good people, hardworking, honest folks who'd carved lives out of impossible land through sheer determination and mutual support. He was helping move tables when he heard it, a child's scream, sharp with fear. Dawson dropped what he was holding and ran toward the sound, his heart hammering. He found Tessa backed against the corral fence, tears streaming down her face, while 3 older boys stood in front of her laughing. "What's going on here?" Dawson's voice came out harder than he'd intended. The boys spun around, their laughter dying. The tallest one, maybe 12 years old, had the decency to look ashamed. "We were just playing, mister. We didn't mean nothing by it." "Didn't mean nothing by what?" "They said," Tessa's voice broke, "they said I was lying about the desert. They said nobody could survive out there for days and that I must have made it all up for attention." White-hot anger flooded through Dawson. He crouched down in front of Tessa, checking her over for any signs of physical harm, then turned to face the boys with an expression that made them take a step back. "That little girl survived 3 days in the desert, protecting her dying mother," Dawson said, his voice deadly quiet. "She stood guard with a stick against predators and heat and thirst that would have killed grown men. She's got more courage in her little finger than the 3 of you combined. And if I ever hear of you calling her a liar again, you'll answer to me. Is that understood?" The boys nodded frantically and scattered like quail. Dawson turned back to Tessa and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his shirt and sobbed, great gulping sobs that shook her small frame. "I wasn't lying," she hiccuped. "I wasn't, Dawson. Everything I said was true." "I know, kid. I know." He stroked her hair, making soothing sounds that he dimly remembered from some other lifetime. "Some people just don't understand how strong you are. That's their failing, not yours." "Tessa!" Maribel came running, Margaret right behind her. "Baby, what happened?" Tessa pulled away from Dawson and threw herself at her mother, recounting the incident in broken sentences between sobs. Maribel's face went white, then red with anger. "Where are those boys?" she demanded. "I want to speak to their parents right now." "Already handled," Dawson said. "Handled how?" "Put the fear of God into them. They won't bother Tessa again." Margaret was shaking her head, her expression troubled. "Those are the Morrison boys. Their father died 6 months ago, and their mother's struggling to control them. They've been acting out, looking for attention in all the wrong ways." "I'm so sorry, Maribel. If I'd known they were bothering your daughter." "It's not your fault," Maribel said, though her arms tightened protectively around Tessa. "But I think maybe we should go. This was too much too soon." "We don't have to leave," Dawson said, though part of him wanted nothing more than to load them in the wagon and take them back to the safety of his ranch. "Not unless you want to." Maribel looked torn, her eyes moving between her daughter's tear-stained face and the gathering where people were starting to notice the commotion. "I want to go home," Tessa whispered. "Please, Mama. I just want to go home." The word home hit Dawson square in the chest. She didn't say, I want to go to Dawson's ranch, or I want to leave. She said home, like his rough cabin had become something more than just temporary shelter. They made their goodbyes quickly, thanking Samuel and Margaret for their hospitality while deflecting concerned questions. The ride back was quiet. Tessa curled between Dawson and Maribel, with her head on her mother's lap, emotionally exhausted from the day's events. I'm sorry, Maribel said softly as they crested the rise that brought Dawson's ranch into view. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have pushed for us to go. It wasn't a mistake, Dawson said. Those boys were out of line, but that doesn't mean the whole afternoon was bad. Tessa had fun before that happened, and you got to meet some good people. Good people who probably think I'm raising a liar for a daughter. Nobody thinks that. And if they do, they're wrong. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. Look, what happened today? It's part of living in the world. Not everyone's going to understand what you've been through. Some people won't believe it because it's easier not to. But that doesn't change what's true. Maribel looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You always know exactly what to say. Not always. Usually I don't know what to say at all, but with you two... He stopped, aware that he was about to say something he couldn't take back. With us what? Maribel prompted gently. With you two. It's easier, that's all. He helped them down from the wagon and unhitched the horses while Maribel got Tessa settled inside. By the time he finished putting everything away and returned to the cabin, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and purple across the desert sky. He found Maribel sitting on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the horizon. Tessa asleep? He asked. Out like a light. Today exhausted her. Maribel patted the step beside her. Sit with me for a minute? Dawson sat, very aware of how close they were. Close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough to catch the scent of sage that clung to her hair. Thank you, Maribel said, for what you did today, for defending Tessa, for bringing us home when things got hard, for... She trailed off, then started again. For everything, Dawson. I know I keep saying it, but I don't think you understand how much you've given us. It's not just our lives, it's hope. The belief that maybe the world isn't as cruel as it seemed. The world is exactly as cruel as it seemed, Dawson said bluntly. Those men who attacked you, they're real. The boys who mocked Tessa today, they exist. Bad things happen to good people all the time, and there's no grand plan or justice to it. That's just how it is. Then why did you help us? If the world is so cruel and meaningless, why bother? It was a fair question. One Dawson had asked himself 100 times since the day he'd found them. Because someone has to, he said finally. Because if everyone just accepts the cruelty and does nothing, then what's the point of any of it? Maybe I can't change the whole world, but I could help 2 people. So I did. Maribel was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she said, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. Dawson's breath caught in his chest. He should say something, should respond somehow. But his throat had closed up and his mind had gone completely blank. You don't have to say anything, Maribel continued, still staring straight ahead at the sunset. I know this is complicated. I know I'm still healing, still grieving Jacob, still figuring out how to survive in a world without him. And I know you have your own ghosts, your own walls. I'm not asking for anything from you, Dawson. I needed you to know, because I don't want to leave here with words unsaid. I've learned that lesson too well. Maribel, it's the small things, she interrupted, as if afraid that if she stopped talking, she'd lose her nerve. The way you check on us during the night when you think we're asleep. The way you carved Tessa's name into that piece of wood so she could practice her letters. The way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not paying attention, like you're memorizing my face. The way you defended her today, like she was your own daughter. I see all of it, Dawson, and it makes me feel things I thought I'd never feel again. Dawson's hands clenched into fists on his knees. You lost your husband less than a year ago. You're still grieving. You're confusing gratitude for... Don't tell me what I'm feeling, Maribel said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. I love Jacob with everything I had. I still love him. I'll always love him. But he's gone, Dawson. He's been gone for months, and I'm still here. Tessa's still here, and we need to find a way to keep living. By staying with me? By building something on top of trauma and desperation? No. By choosing to take a chance on something good when it appears in front of us. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. You feel it too. I know you do. This thing between us, it's not just gratitude or convenience, it's real. Dawson looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built brick by careful brick over 7 years of loneliness. I can't lose anyone else, he whispered. When Maria died, it nearly killed me. I can't go through that again. So your plan is to never care about anyone? To live alone out here until you die? It's safer. It's not living, Maribel countered. It's just surviving. And there's a difference. Before Dawson could respond, a sound made them both freeze, hoofbeats coming fast, the rhythm irregular like the rider was pushing hard. Dawson was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he'd leaned against the porch rail. 3 horses emerged from the gathering darkness, their riders pushing them hard enough that foam flecked their necks. Dawson recognized the lead horse immediately. It belonged to Samuel Ortiz. "Dawson!" Samuel shouted as he pulled his horse to a sliding stop. "We've got trouble." The other 2 riders resolved into Thomas Reed and another rancher Dawson knew only slightly, a man named Cooper from the Eastern Range. All 3 men looked grim. "What kind of trouble, Dawson asked, already moving toward them. "The Morrison boys went home and told their mother about what happened today. Except they twisted the story all around, made it sound like Tessa attacked them and you threatened to shoot them." Samuel dismounted heavily. Mary Morrison's half out of her mind with grief and anger. She went to town and found herself a lawyer, some fancy man from Tucson who's been hanging around asking questions. Dawson felt ice settle in his stomach. What kind of questions? About missing women and children? About reward money for information? Thomas moved his horse closer, his voice urgent. "Dawson, this lawyer, his name's Silas Morrow. He's been posting notices all over town about a missing widow and child from the Lane estate. There's money involved. A lot of money." Maribel had gone white as a sheet. She stood up slowly, one hand pressed to her side, the other gripping the porch rail like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "The Lane estate," she whispered. "Jacob's family." "You know about this?" Dawson demanded. "I knew they existed. Jacob was estranged from them. His father is, a wealthy man back east. Railroad money. When Jacob married me, his father disowned him. Said I wasn't good enough for their family name. We never heard from them again." "Until now," Samuel said grimly. "According to the notices, Jacob Lane died intestate, and his daughter, Tessa, is the sole heir to a significant fortune. The family's lawyer is searching for the widow and child to ensure they receive their inheritance." "That's a lie," Maribel said flatly. "Jacob's father wouldn't give us a penny. He made that clear 15 years ago." "Maybe not," Cooper said, "but he might want his granddaughter. Might want to raise her proper in his world, away from her mother?" Maribel's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Is that what you were going to say?" "I'm just telling you what people in town are saying, ma'am. This lawyer, he's making it sound real official, real legal. Says he has a court order giving him custody of the child until the estate matters can be settled." "He can't do that," Dawson said. "He has no legal right to take a child from her mother." "He can if he convinces a judge that the mother is unfit," Samuel said quietly. "And forgive me for saying this, Maribel, but a widow with no home, no money, no visible means of support, who was found half dead in the desert. It wouldn't be hard to build a case." The words hit like physical blows. Dawson watched Maribel's face crumble, watched her fold in on herself as the full weight of the threat became clear. "They can't take her," she whispered. "They can't take my baby. She's all I have left." "When is this lawyer coming?" Dawson asked, his mind already racing through possibilities and plans. "That's why we rode out here so fast," Thomas said. "Mary Morrison told him where to find you. He's gathering the sheriff and some deputies saying he needs protection because you made threats. They're planning to come at first light tomorrow." "Then we have until dawn," Dawson said. Maribel, go inside and pack everything you need, light and fast, only what you can carry. Where are we going? Her voice was small, frightened in a way he hadn't heard since that first day in the desert. Away from here. Somewhere they can't find you. Dawson, they'll track us. You know they will. Not if we're smart about it. Not if we have help. He turned to Samuel. How much time can you buy us? I can delay them a few hours, maybe. Tell them you went to check fence line in the south section. Send them the wrong direction. Samuel's face was troubled. But Dawson, this is going to make you an outlaw. Interfering with a legal custody order. That's serious business. Let me worry about that, Dawson said. Right now, all that matters is keeping them safe. The three men exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. All right, Samuel said. We'll do what we can. But be smart about this, my friend. Don't do anything that can't be undone. They rode off into the darkness, leaving Dawson and Maribel standing in the yard. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Maribel's legs gave out and she collapsed. Dawson caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest as she shook with silent sobs. I can't lose her, Maribel gasped against his shirt. Dawson, I can't. She's everything. She's all I have. You're not going to lose her, Dawson said fiercely. I won't let that happen. Do you hear me? I won't let anyone take her from you. How can you stop them? They have the law on their side. They have money and power and I have something they don't, Dawson interrupted. He pulled back just enough to look into her tear-stained face. I have you, and I have Tessa, and I'll be damned if I'll stand by and let some lawyer steal you both away because of money and legal documents. What are we going to do? Dawson's jaw set in a line that would have made his old war buddies nervous. We're going to fight, but first, we need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. Where? I know a place, a canyon about 30 miles north, hidden enough that most folks don't even know it exists. We can hole up there while I figure out our next move. Our next move? Maribel repeated. Dawson, this isn't your fight. You've already done so much. It became my fight the moment I brought you home, Dawson said. The moment I decided you were under my protection. Nobody takes what's mine, not without one hell of a battle first. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, Maribel felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Okay, she whispered. Okay, what do you need me to do? Wake Tessa, pack light, and trust me. He cupped her face in his rough hands, his eyes intense in the darkness. Can you do that, Maribel? Can you trust me? She thought about everything that had happened since he'd found them in the desert. Every kindness, every protection, every moment he'd chosen them over his own safety and solitude. Yes, she said. I trust you. The words sealed something between them, some unspoken promise that went deeper than gratitude or attraction. In that moment, standing in the darkness with danger riding toward them on the wind, they became something more than a rescuer and the rescued. They became allies, partners, family. They moved through this cabin like ghosts, gathering supplies in the lamplight while Tessa slept on, exhausted from the day's emotional turmoil. Dawson packed food and water, ammunition and medical supplies, bedrolls and blankets, everything they'd need to survive in the wilderness for days, maybe weeks. Maribel folded the dresses Margaret had given her with shaking hands, then stopped and looked at Dawson with wide, frightened eyes. What if we're making this worse? What if running makes me look guilty, makes it easier for them to take her? Dawson paused in loading his rifle. And what if staying means they take her tonight, cart her off to some mansion back east where you'll never see her again? He crossed to where she stood, his voice gentle but firm. Maribel, I've seen how the law works when money's involved. Rich men don't play fair. They buy judges, manufacture evidence, twist the truth until black looks white. If this Silas Morrow gets his hands on Tessa, it won't matter what's right or true. It'll only matter what he can make a court believe. So we run and hide like criminals. We run and buy time to figure out how to fight this properly. There's a difference. He touched her shoulder lightly. I won't let them take her, but I need you to be strong right now. Can you do that? Maribel drew in a shaky breath and nodded. I can be strong. I've been strong before. I know you have. Dawson squeezed her shoulder once, then released her. Now wake Tessa. Tell her we're going on an adventure. Make it sound exciting, not scary. Kids can sense fear. While Maribel went to wake her daughter, Dawson stepped outside to ready the horses. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. He worked quickly, his hands moving through familiar tasks while his mind raced ahead, planning routes and contingencies. The canyon he'd mentioned was real, a narrow slash in the rocks that most people rode past without noticing. He'd discovered it years ago while tracking a wounded deer, and had kept the knowledge to himself the way a man keeps any valuable secret. There was water there, a spring that never dried even in the worst summers, and enough shelter from the elements that they could survive comfortably for quite some time. But survival wasn't the goal. The goal was finding a way to neutralize the threat permanently. He was cinching the saddle on his gelding when Maribel emerged from the cabin, Tessa in her arms. The child was half awake, her eyes puffy with sleep and confusion. "Dawson, what's happening? Mama says we're going on an adventure, but it's nighttime, and adventures are supposed to be in daytime, and special adventures happen at night," Dawson said, forcing lightness into his voice, "because that's when you can see all the stars and hear the coyotes singing. I thought you might like to camp out under the sky, like real ranchers do." Tessa perked up slightly. "Really? We get to sleep outside?" "Yep. And tomorrow I'll teach you how to track animals and read the signs the desert leaves. Would you like that?" "Yes!" Some of the fear left Tessa's face, replaced by genuine excitement. "Can I ride with you, please?" Dawson looked at Maribel, who nodded. He lifted Tessa onto his horse, then helped Maribel onto the mare he'd saddled for her. She moved stiffly, her healing wound clearly bothering her, but she didn't complain. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'll manage." She gathered the reins with determination. "Let's go before I lose my nerve." They rode north under a sky full of stars, Dawson leading the way along paths only he knew. He avoided the main trails, sticking to rocky ground where their tracks would be harder to follow. Tessa fell asleep against his chest within the first mile, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Behind him, he could hear Maribel's mare following, the soft sounds of hoofbeats on sand and stone. The miles passed in tense silence. Every sound made Dawson's hand drift toward his rifle. Every shadow might hide pursuers. He'd told Samuel they had until dawn, but rich men had ways of speeding things up when they wanted to. For all he knew, Silas Morrow and his hired guns could already be at the ranch, finding it empty, beginning their hunt. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses. Dawson lifted Tessa down carefully, trying not to wake her, and laid her on a blanket in the shelter of some rocks. Maribel dismounted stiffly, pressing her hand to her side. "Let me see," Dawson said, reaching for her. "It's fine." "Let me see," he repeated more firmly. Maribel reluctantly lifted her shirt enough for him to check the bandage. There was fresh blood seeping through, not much, but enough to worry him. The hard riding had pulled some of her stitches. "Damn it," he muttered. "I should have waited longer. You're not healed enough for this." "We didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice. I could have stayed and faced them. Could have what? Let them take Tessa while I watched?" Maribel's voice was fierce despite her pain. "No. We made the right choice. I'll heal. But if they'd taken my daughter, I'd never recover from that." Dawson cleaned and rebandaged the wound as best he could in the darkness, his hand steady despite the worry churning in his gut. When he was finished, Maribel caught his wrist. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you're risking. I know what this could cost you. You're worth the risk." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. In the starlight, Dawson could see Maribel's expression shift, could see the moment she decided to be brave. "Earlier tonight, I told you I was falling in love with you. You never answered." "Maribel, I know the timing is terrible. I know we're running for our lives and everything is chaos and uncertainty. But if something happens, if they catch us, if we get separated, I need you to know that what I feel is real. It's not gratitude or desperation or grief making me confused. It's you, the man you are, the way you've chosen to protect us even when it costs you everything." Dawson closed his eyes, fighting against the tide of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I can't give you what you deserve, I'm a broken man living in a broken-down ranch in the middle of nowhere. You should have a proper life, a proper home, someone who... Someone who what? Someone who doesn't wake up at night to check that we're still breathing? Someone who doesn't carve my daughter's name in wood so she can practice her letters? Someone who doesn't look at me like I'm precious? Maribel's voice cracked. Dawson, you're already giving me everything I could ever want. You're just too stubborn to see it. He opened his eyes and found her watching him with an expression that made his chest ache. I'm scared, he admitted. Scared of caring this much. Scared of losing you. Scared of being happy, Maribel finished gently. I understand that fear. After Jacob died, I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. But then you found us, and you gave me reasons to hope. You made me remember what it feels like to look forward instead of back. I don't know if I can be what you need. You already are. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. You already are, Dawson. You just have to let yourself believe it. For a long moment, they stood there in the darkness. The desert stretched around them vast and empty, danger riding toward them on the wind. Then Dawson did something he hadn't allowed himself to do in 7 long years. He reached out and pulled Maribel into his arms. She came willingly, melting against him with a soft sigh of relief. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of sage and something uniquely her. Her arms wrapped around his waist, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. I can't promise you anything, he whispered against her hair. Can't promise we'll make it through this. Can't promise I won't fail you the way I failed Maria. You didn't fail Maria. Life failed her. Circumstances failed her. But you loved her and honored her memory and kept living even when it hurt. That's not failure, Dawson. That's courage. I'm not courageous. You're the bravest man I've ever known. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. And I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Dawson looked down at her upturned face, at the determination in her eyes, the strength in her jaw, the vulnerability she was trusting him with, and felt the last of his walls crumble. Together, he agreed roughly. Then before he could second-guess himself, he bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like neither of them quite believed they were allowed this moment of softness in the midst of chaos. But then Maribel made a small sound and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like a promise, like a claiming, like coming home after a long and brutal journey. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dawson rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cupped around her face. We should keep moving, he said, though he made no move to release her. Yes, Maribel agreed, also not moving. We should. Neither of them moved for several more heartbeats. Then Tessa stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about chickens, and the spell broke. They separated reluctantly, both of them wearing expressions that were equal parts wonder and fear. They rode through the rest of the night in charged silence, something fundamental having shifted between them. Dawson found himself hyper-aware of Maribel's presence behind him, of the soft sounds of her breathing, of the knowledge that she'd chosen him despite everything. Dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink when the canyon finally came into view. It was easy to miss, just a narrow crack in the rocks that looked like nothing from a distance. But as they drew closer, Dawson guided them into the opening, and the world opened up. The canyon was maybe 50 feet wide and twice as long, its walls rising high enough to block the worst of the sun during the day. Desert willows grew along one side, their roots tapping into the underground spring that surfaced here. There was grass, actual grass, growing in patches where water collected, and the remains of an ancient dwelling tucked into an overhang, stone walls that some long ago people had built and abandoned. It's beautiful, Maribel breathed, looking around with wide eyes. It's safe, Dawson corrected, though he had to admit the place had a certain harsh beauty to it. We can see anyone approaching from either end, and there's only 2 ways in, easy to defend if it comes to that. Will it come to that? Maribel asked quietly, so Tessa wouldn't hear. The girl was awake now, staring around at their new surroundings with curious eyes. I don't know, Dawson admitted, but I'd rather be prepared. He helped them dismount, then began the work of setting up camp. The ancient dwelling was still sound enough to provide shelter, and there was wood scattered around from dead willows that would burn clean. Within an hour, he had a small fire going and coffee brewing, the familiar routines grounding him despite the circumstances. Tessa explored the canyon with the fearless enthusiasm of a child, climbing rocks and chasing lizards while Maribel watched with anxious eyes. Dawson understood the fear, every mother's instinct to keep her child close when danger threatened. But he also knew that Tessa needed normalcy, needed to feel like this was an adventure instead of a flight for survival. "Let her play," he said gently, handing Maribel a cup of coffee. "She's safe here, and she needs this." "I know, it's just—" Maribel wrapped her hands around the cup. "What if they find us? What if all of this is for nothing? Then we run again. And again, if necessary. As many times as it takes. You can't keep running forever, Dawson. Eventually, you'll have to go back to your ranch, back to your life. You can't just abandon everything for us." "Watch me," Dawson said flatly. "That ranch is just wood and land. You and Tessa, you're what matters." Maribel's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to process this. Yesterday I was worried about traveling to Tucson. Today I'm a fugitive with a price on my head, camping in a canyon with a man who's given up everything to protect us." "You're not a fugitive. You're a mother protecting her child." Dawson sat down beside her on the rocks, close enough that their shoulders touched. "And I haven't given up everything. I've just finally found something worth fighting for again. When this is over, if we survive this, what happens then?" It was a fair question. One Dawson had been avoiding thinking about because the answer terrified him almost as much as the danger they were currently facing. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I meant what I said last night. We face it together. Whatever comes next, we decide it together." "Together," Maribel repeated, testing the word like she was learning a new language. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence, watching Tessa play in the morning sun, both of them trying not to think about what might be coming. They spent the day in the canyon, Dawson teaching Tessa how to read animal tracks and identify edible plants, while Maribel rested and tried to regain her strength. It was almost peaceful, like they were just a family on a camping trip instead of fugitives hiding from the law. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, that peace shattered. Dawson saw them first. 3 riders on the canyon rim to the south, silhouetted against the sky. He grabbed Tessa and pulled her behind the rocks, motioning frantically for Maribel to get down. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his rifle already in his hands. "Don't move." His heart hammered as he watched the riders. They were too far away to identify, but something about the way they sat their horses, deliberate, searching, made his blood run cold. These weren't casual travelers. These were men hunting something. Hunting them. The riders stayed on the rim for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Dawson could see them pointing, discussing something. One of them had a spyglass, sweeping it across the landscape. Dawson pressed himself flatter against the rocks, praying they were hidden well enough, praying the canyon's natural camouflage would do its job. Finally, after an eternity, the riders moved on, disappearing over the ridge to the north. Dawson waited 10 more minutes, barely breathing, before he allowed himself to relax. "Are they gone?" Maribel whispered, her face white. "For now. But they're looking, and they're closer than I'd like." He looked at the sky, calculating. "We'll wait until full dark, then move deeper into the canyon. There's another section I know about, harder to reach, but more defensible." "Dawson, maybe we should..." "Should what? Turn ourselves in? Let them take Tessa?" His voice came out harsher than he'd intended. "No, absolutely not. I was going to say maybe we should consider going to the law ourselves. Get ahead of this. Tell our side of the story before Silas Morrow can twist everything." It wasn't a bad idea, actually. Dawson had been so focused on running that he hadn't considered the alternative, facing the threat head-on with truth as their weapon. "There's a magistrate in Red Rock," he said slowly, thinking it through. "Judge Henry Blackwood. He's honest, or as honest as any man with power gets. He owes me a favor from years back. If we could get to him before Morrow does, make our case, though..." "It's a risk," Maribel said. "Everything's a risk right now. At least this way we're choosing the battlefield instead of always reacting. He looked at Tessa, who was watching them both with scared, too wise eyes. What do you think, kid? Should we go see a judge and tell him the truth about everything that happened? Will he believe us? Tessa asked in a small voice. I don't know, but I think we have to try, because your mama's right. We can't run forever. Tessa was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but you have to come with us. You have to stay with us the whole time. I'm not going anywhere, Dawson promised. You're stuck with me now, whether you like it or not. A smile flickered across Tessa's face. I like it. The simple declaration hit Dawson harder than he'd expected. This child, who'd lost so much, who had every reason to be bitter and afraid, was choosing to trust him, choosing to include him in her tiny, broken family. Then it's settled, Dawson said, his voice rough with emotion. We head to Red Rock at first light, but tonight, we rest and we plan. Because when we face that judge, we need to be smart about it. That night, after Tessa had fallen asleep, Dawson and Maribel sat by the fire and planned their approach. They would go to Judge Blackwood directly, bypassing the sheriff who might be in Silas Morrow's pocket. They would bring evidence, Maribel's marriage certificate, Tessa's birth record, anything that proved her identity and her relationship to the child. They would tell the truth about the attack, about Jacob's death, about everything that had happened. What if it's not enough? Maribel asked as the fire burned low. What if money and influence win anyway? Then we run again, Dawson said. Canada, maybe? Or Mexico? Somewhere beyond their reach. And you'd come with us? Leave everything behind? Dawson looked at her across the fire, at her determined face, at her hands that never stopped reaching for Tessa even in sleep, at the strength that radiated from her despite everything she'd endured. I told you before, you're what matters. Everything else is just details. Maribel's eyes glistened with tears in the firelight. I don't deserve you. You've got that backwards, Dawson said. I'm the one who doesn't deserve you, but I'm too selfish to care. He stood and walked around the fire to where she sat. She looked up at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, fear and hope, and something fiercer, something that looked like love even though it was too soon, too fast, too impossible to be real. Maribel, he said quietly, when this is over, when we fought our way through this mess and come out the other side, I want to ask you something. But I can't ask it now, not when everything is uncertain. So I'm asking you to wait, to give me time to do this right. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Dawson, wait, he repeated. Please, let me give you more than a proposal made on the run. Let me give you stability and safety, and a real choice, not one made out of desperation. Maribel stood, closing the distance between them. She reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. You already give me all of that, she whispered. Every single day you give me reasons to hope, reasons to believe in tomorrow. But I'll wait, because you're worth waiting for. Dawson caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Then let's survive tomorrow first. Everything else can come after. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind sang through the canyon walls. Somewhere out there, danger was hunting them. Somewhere out there, a man with money and power was trying to tear their fragile family apart. But here, in this moment, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. As dawn broke over the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, Dawson woke them and began preparations for the ride to Red Rock. It was a gamble, walking straight into town when there were people looking for them. But hiding had bought them time to think, and now it was time to act. He saddled the horses while Maribel helped Tessa dress and eat a quick breakfast. The girl was quieter than usual, sensing the tension in the adults around her. Are we going to see the judge now? She asked as Dawson lifted her onto his horse. We are. And I need you to be very brave today, Tessa. Can you do that? I can be brave. I was brave in the desert, wasn't I? You were the bravest, Dawson confirmed. And today, I need you to be brave again. The judge is going to ask you questions about what happened, about the men who hurt your family, about everything. And I need you to tell him the truth, even if it's scary to remember. Can you do that? Tessa's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. I can tell the truth. Mama says truth is always better than lies, even when truth is hard. Your mama's a smart woman, Dawson said, helping Maribel mount her horse. Ready? No, Maribel admitted, but let's go anyway. They rode out of the canyon as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind the temporary safety they'd found there. The journey to Red Rock would take most of the day, and every mile brought new dangers. They might run into Silas Moro's men. They might be arrested on sight. They might find that the judge had already been compromised. But they rode anyway, because sometimes the only way out was through, and because they'd chosen to face it together. The ride to Red Rock was tense and silent, broken only by Tessa's occasional questions about what they'd say to the judge. Dawson kept his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, looking for riders, for dust clouds, for any sign that they'd been spotted. Maribel rode beside him, her face set in determined lines despite the pain he knew she must be feeling from the long journey on horseback. They reached the outskirts of town around noon, and Dawson pulled them to a stop behind a stand of cottonwoods to survey the situation. Red Rock was bigger than the settlements near his ranch. Maybe 200 people called it home, with a proper main street, a courthouse, several saloons, and even a small hotel. From their vantage point, Dawson could see the usual midday activity: wagons rolling through, men gathered outside the general store, women with their shopping baskets. And there, tied to the hitching post outside the courthouse, were 3 horses that made his blood run cold. Expensive horses, well-groomed and outfitted with fancy tack that screamed money and Eastern refinement. "They're already here," Maribel whispered, following his gaze. "Looks that way." Dawson's mind raced through options. They could turn around, head back to the canyon, buy themselves more time. But time for what? The longer they waited, the more Silas Moro could poison the well, spreading his version of events to anyone who'd listen. "We keep going," Dawson decided. "We face this now, on our terms. What if the judge has already sided with them? Then we'll know where we stand. But Judge Blackwood, he's a fair man, or he was, last time I dealt with him. That was 5 years ago when I testified in a land dispute case. He ruled based on evidence, not money. I have to believe he's still that man." Maribel reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You promised, and I keep my promises," Dawson said, squeezing her hand before releasing it. He looked down at Tessa, who sat in front of him, unusually quiet. "Hey, kid, you remember what we talked about? About being brave and telling the truth?" "I remember." "Good girl. Now, when we get in there, some things might be said that are scary or confusing, but I need you to trust that your mama and I are going to handle it. Can you do that?" Tessa twisted around to look up at him, her dark eyes serious. "Are you going to marry my mama?" The question caught Dawson completely off guard. Behind him, he heard Maribel's sharp intake of breath. "Tessa," Maribel said, "that's not... This isn't the time." "But I heard you talking last night," Tessa said, looking between them. "Dawson said he wanted to ask you something when everything was over. That's what people say before they ask about marrying, isn't it? Mrs. Ortiz told me that when I asked why her daughter was so happy all the time." To see, Dawson felt heat rise in his face. "Tessa, that's a conversation for later. Right now we need to focus on..." "I think we should get married," Tessa continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Because then we'd be a real family and nobody could take me away because you'd be my papa. That's how it works, right? If you marry mama, you become my papa?" The simple logic of a child cutting through all the complexity and fear straight to the heart of the matter. Dawson looked at Maribel and saw his own stunned realization reflected in her eyes. "She's right," Maribel said slowly. "If we were married, if you legally adopted Tessa, Silas Moro would have no claim. The inheritance might still be an issue, but he couldn't argue that I'm an unfit mother or that Tessa needs to be removed from my custody." "We can't get married just to solve a legal problem," Dawson protested, even as part of his mind was already calculating the angles. It wouldn't be right." "Why not?" Maribel's voice was steady now, gaining strength. "You said you wanted to ask me something when this was over. You said you wanted to do it right, to give me a real choice. Well, this is a real choice, Dawson. Choose us. Choose this family we're building. Choose right now, before we walk into that courthouse and face whatever's waiting there." "Maribel, I love you," she said simply. I know it's fast and crazy and probably foolish, but I love you. I love the way you check on us at night when you think we're sleeping. I love how you carve Tessa's name in wood. I love that you're willing to fight the whole world to keep us safe. And I want to marry you, Dawson Reeve. Not because it's legally convenient, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Dawson felt like someone had knocked the air from his lungs. He looked at Maribel, at her fierce determination, at the love shining in her eyes, and then at Tessa, who was watching him with hopeful expectation. I don't have a ring, he said, which was possibly the stupidest thing he could have said given the circumstances. Maribel laughed, a sound that was half sob. I don't need a ring, I need you. And I need a papa, Tessa added helpfully. A real papa who'll teach me about horses and protect us from bad men and love Mama the way she deserves. Dawson closed his eyes, feeling the last of his resistance crumble. He'd been alone for 7 years, building walls and keeping the world at arm's length. These two had torn through his defenses in a matter of weeks, and now they were offering him something he'd thought he'd never have again. A family, a purpose, a reason to believe in tomorrow. All right, he said, opening his eyes. Yes, if you'll have me, if you're sure this is what you want, then yes. I'll marry you, Maribel Lane. And Tessa, he looked down at the girl. I'd be honored to be your papa. Tessa let out a whoop of joy and threw her arms around him, nearly unseating them both from the horse. Maribel was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. The biggest, brightest smile Dawson had ever seen. But we're doing this properly, Dawson said, his practical side reasserting itself. Which means we need a preacher and witnesses and legal documents. Judge Blackwood can probably help with that, assuming he doesn't throw us in jail first. Then let's go ask him, Maribel said, wiping her eyes. Let's go face whatever's waiting in that courthouse. Together. As a family. They rode into town slowly, very aware of the stares they attracted. Word had clearly spread about the missing widow and child, and 3 strangers riding in together was bound to draw attention. Dawson kept his hand near his rifle, ready for trouble, as they approached the courthouse. The building was 2 stories of whitewashed adobe with a bell tower that doubled as a lookout. Dawson had been here before, years ago, and found it unchanged. Same wooden steps, same heavy door, same sense of weighty authority that all courthouses seem to carry. He helped Maribel and Tessa dismount, then tied the horses to the rail next to the fancy Eastern horses. Up close, he could see they were even more expensive than he'd thought. Thoroughbreds, probably worth more than his entire ranch. Ready? He asked quietly. Maribel took his hand on one side, Tessa's on the other. Ready. They climbed the steps together and pushed through the heavy door into the cool interior. The courthouse lobby was empty except for a clerk dozing at a desk and a well-dressed man pacing near the stairs. The man looked up as they entered, and his eyes went immediately to Maribel and Tessa. Mrs. Lane, I presume? The man's voice was cultured, Eastern, and cold as ice. I'm Silas Morrow, attorney representing the Lane family estate. I've been searching for you. He was tall and lean, probably in his 40s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from marble. All sharp angles and no warmth. His suit probably cost more than most people in Red Rock made in a year. Mr. Morrow, Maribel said, her voice remarkably steady. I'm afraid I have nothing to say to you. On the contrary, Mrs. Lane, you have a great deal to explain, such as why you've been hiding from the law with this man, he gestured dismissively at Dawson, and why you've been preventing your daughter from claiming her rightful inheritance. I haven't been hiding from the law. I've been recovering from being left to die in the desert by bandits who murdered my husband. A convenient story, but one that's difficult to verify. Silas pulled papers from his jacket pocket. What I have here, however, is quite verifiable. This is a court order granting me temporary custody of the minor child Tessa Lane pending resolution of estate matters. The judge has already reviewed the evidence and— What judge? Dawson interrupted, his voice dangerous. Judge Blackwood, of course, the presiding magistrate of this district. He signed the order this morning after reviewing my petition and supporting documentation. Dawson felt his stomach drop. If Blackwood had already signed a custody order, if Morrow had gotten to him first with his twisted version of events, I'd like to hear that from Judge Blackwood himself, Dawson said. Would you? A new voice came from the top of the stairs. Then come up to my chambers, all of you. It seems we have much to discuss. Judge Henry Blackwood descended the stairs with the careful dignity of a man who knew his own authority. He was in his 60s, with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Dawson, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. Dawson Reeve, I heard you were involved in this matter. Didn't quite believe it until now. He turned his gaze to Maribel and Tessa. Mrs. Lane, Miss Lane, please come to my chambers. Mr. Morrow, you as well. They climbed the stairs in tense silence and filed into the judge's chambers, a spacious room lined with law books and dominated by a massive desk. Blackwood settled into his chair and gestured for everyone else to sit. Dawson remained standing, positioning himself between Maribel and Silas Morrow. Now then, Blackwood said, steepling his fingers. Mr. Morrow arrived yesterday with quite a story about a missing widow and child, inheritance matters, and concerns about the child's welfare. He provided documentation, he tapped the papers on his desk, that seemed legitimate. Marriage certificates, death records, birth certificates, all properly notarized. He claimed that Mrs. Lane had essentially kidnapped the child and was hiding from the family that wished to provide for them both. That's a lie, Maribel said quietly. Is it? Then perhaps you'd like to share your version of events, Mrs. Lane. And before you begin, I should warn you that I have very little patience for deception. I suggest complete honesty. So Maribel told the story, all of it. The attack on the trail, Jacob's murder, being left to die, Dawson finding them, the long recovery. She spoke clearly and calmly, though her voice shook when she described watching her husband die. Tessa pressed against her side, occasionally adding her own details about the bad men in the desert and how Dawson had saved them. When she finished, the room was silent. Blackwood's expression was unreadable. A compelling narrative, Silas Morrow said into the silence, but one conveniently lacking in any corroborating evidence. We have only Mrs. Lane's word that any of this occurred. Meanwhile, I have documented proof that Jacob Lane died intestate, that his daughter is heir to a considerable fortune, and that Mrs. Lane has been evading legal authorities and living in isolation with a man to whom she has no legal connection. She wasn't evading anyone, Dawson said. She was recovering from wounds that nearly killed her. I have neighbors who can testify to her condition when I found her. Hell, I can show you the wound itself if— A wound proves nothing, Silas interrupted smoothly. It doesn't prove how she acquired it. It doesn't prove her version of events. And it certainly doesn't prove she's a fit guardian for a child who stands to inherit a substantial estate. What it proves, Judge Blackwood said quietly, is that something violent happened to this woman. And having known Dawson Reeve for some years, I find it difficult to believe he'd be party to any scheme or deception. The man's as honest as they come, even when honesty costs him. Silas's expression hardened. Your Honor, with respect, personal acquaintance doesn't constitute evidence, no. But it does constitute context, which is something I value highly. Blackwood turned to Maribel. Mrs. Lane, can you explain why Jacob Lane's family, who I understand are quite wealthy, would go to such lengths to claim custody of your daughter if they have your best interests at heart? Because they never wanted me in their family, Maribel said. When Jacob married me, his father disowned him, said I was beneath their station, a school teacher from Ohio with no family connections or money. They cut him off completely. We heard nothing from them for 15 years. Not a letter, not a word. Then Jacob dies, and suddenly they care about their granddaughter? She shook her head. They don't want Tessa because they love her. They want her because she's an heir. They want control of whatever Jacob might have left behind. That's a serious accusation, Blackwood said. It's the truth. Ask Mr. Morrow if Jacob's father has even inquired about meeting his granddaughter. Ask him if there's been any expression of concern for my welfare or Tessa's emotional state. Or ask him what happens to the inheritance if Tessa is deemed incompetent or if something happens to her before she reaches majority. Silas's face went carefully blank, which told Dawson everything he needed to know. This wasn't about family, it was about money. It was always about money. Mr. Morrow, Blackwood prompted, would you care to address Mrs. Lane's questions? The specifics of the estate planning are confidential matters between, which means they benefit someone other than the child, Dawson interrupted. Your Honor, this man didn't come here out of concern for Tessa's welfare. He came here to take control of a child so he can control her inheritance. Everything else is just legal window dressing. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the faces in the room. Finally, he sighed and reached for the document on his desk. The custody order Silas had mentioned. Mr. Morrow provided me with convincing documentation this morning. Documentation that suggested Mrs. Lane was unstable, potentially dangerous, and certainly unfit to raise a child alone in her current circumstances. He picked up the paper, and Dawson's heart sank. However, having now heard from Mrs. Lane herself, and having evaluated her demeanor and credibility, and particularly having considered the testimony of young Tessa here, who seems quite clear about what happened to her family, I find myself reconsidering my earlier decision. Hope flared in Dawson's chest. Your Honor, Silas said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You signed that order. It's legally binding. You cannot simply... I can do whatever I deem to be in the best interests of justice, Blackwood said sharply. That's what judges do, Mr. Morrow. We evaluate evidence and make decisions. And when new evidence suggests our initial decision was flawed, we correct course. He picked up the custody order and, in a deliberate motion that made Silas go pale, tore it in half. There is no custody order, Blackwood said. Mrs. Lane retains full custody of her daughter. As for the inheritance matters, those are civil issues that will need to be resolved through proper probate channels. But that's a matter for the courts in whatever jurisdiction Jacob Lane's estate falls under, not for this court. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. What's irregular, Mr. Morrow, is you showing up in my district with documents and accusations trying to separate a mother from her child based on nothing more than legal technicalities and wealthy family connections. Blackwood's voice hardened. I don't appreciate being used as a tool for what is clearly a money grab. The Lane family wants access to their granddaughter. Let them petition properly through the right channels. Let them demonstrate genuine concern for the child's welfare. Until then, Tessa stays with her mother. Silas stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This isn't over. I'll appeal this decision. I'll take it to the territorial court. The Lane family has resources you can't imagine, and they will not be denied what is rightfully... Get out of my chambers, Blackwood said quietly, before I hold you in contempt. For a moment, Dawson thought Silas might actually argue, but then the lawyer gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements and stalked toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Maribel. You've won nothing here, Mrs. Lane. This is a temporary setback. The Lane family will have their granddaughter, one way or another. It's only a question of time. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs, followed by the slam of the courthouse door. The silence he left behind was almost painful. Maribel was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Tessa had her face buried in her mother's skirt. Dawson felt his own hands trembling with released tension. Thank you, Maribel whispered. Your Honor, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Blackwood said, his expression troubled. Mr. Morrow was right about one thing. This isn't over. The Lane family has money and influence, and they can make your life very difficult if they choose to. You need to be prepared for a long legal battle. Then we'll fight it, Dawson said, as long as it takes. Blackwood's eyes sharpened as he looked at Dawson. As we? And what exactly is your role in this family, Reeve? I'm the man who's going to marry Mrs. Lane, if she'll still have me after all this. Dawson looked at Maribel, who was staring at him with wide eyes. That is, if Your Honor would be willing to perform the ceremony. Today, if possible. Today? Blackwood raised an eyebrow. That's rather sudden. With respect, Your Honor, there's nothing sudden about it. I've known for a while now that I wanted this. I was just too stubborn to admit it. Dawson turned to face Maribel fully, taking her hands in his. I know this isn't the proposal I wanted to give you. There's no pretty words prepared, no ring, no fancy setting. But I love you, Maribel. I love your strength and your courage and the way you've fought for your daughter against impossible odds. I love how you've made my empty cabin feel like a home. And I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making sure you and Tessa are safe and loved and happy. Maribel was crying in earnest now. Yes, she managed. Yes, of course, yes. And Tessa... Dawson looked down at the girl, who was watching him with shining eyes. I want to adopt you legally, make you my daughter in every way that matters. Would that be all right with you? You'd really be my papa? For real? For real? Forever. Tessa launched herself at him with enough force to nearly knock him over. He caught her and held on, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck in a fierce hug. I'd like that very much, she whispered against his shoulder. Papa. The word hit Dawson like a physical blow. Papa. He was going to be someone's papa again. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Well then, Judge Blackwood said, and Dawson could have sworn he saw the corners of the old judge's mouth twitch upward. I suppose I'm performing a wedding today, though we'll need witnesses. Mrs. Henderson, he raised his voice. Could you fetch Pastor Williams and his wife? Tell them we have a wedding that needs performing immediately. The clerk appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. A wedding, Your Honor? Yes, yes, and bring the adoption papers as well. Might as well handle everything at once. 20 minutes later, they stood in the courthouse lobby with Pastor Williams, a kindly man in his 70s who'd married half the territory, and his wife as witnesses. Judge Blackwood presided. The legal documents spread on the clerk's desk. This is highly irregular, the pastor said, but he was smiling. But then again, love usually is. Shall we begin? The ceremony was simple and quick, but no less meaningful for its brevity. Pastor Williams spoke about commitment and faith, about choosing to love someone every day regardless of circumstances. Dawson barely heard the words, too focused on Maribel's face, on the joy and hope and love shining in her eyes. Do you, Dawson Reeve, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Dawson said, his voice steady and sure. And do you, Maribel Rose Lane, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Maribel whispered. Then by the power vested in me by the Arizona Territory and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Dawson cupped Maribel's face in his hands and kissed her gently, aware of Tessa watching, aware of witnesses, aware that this moment was changing everything. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. Now then, Judge Blackwood said, all business again. The adoption papers. Dawson Reeve, do you swear to take legal responsibility for the minor child Tessa Lane, to provide for her welfare, to raise her as your own daughter, and to protect her rights and interests to the best of your ability? I do, Dawson said, looking down at Tessa. And Tessa Lane, do you consent to be adopted by Dawson Reeve, to take his name as your own, and to accept him as your legal father? I do, Tessa said, bouncing on her toes. Then it's done. Blackwood signed the documents with a flourish. Tessa Lane is now Tessa Reeve, daughter of Dawson and Maribel Reeve. The adoption is final and binding. He handed the papers to Dawson, who took them with shaking hands. Just like that, his life had changed completely. He had a wife. He had a daughter. He had a family. One more thing, Blackwood said quietly, pulling Dawson aside while Maribel and Tessa embraced. Silas Morrow wasn't bluffing. The Lane family will appeal this. They'll try every legal avenue they can think of to get custody of that child. You need to be prepared for a fight. I am prepared, Dawson said. Good. Because they're not going to play fair. Men with that kind of money never do. Blackwood paused, then added, but you've got something they don't. You've got the truth on your side. And you've got me. If they try anything in my jurisdiction, I'll make sure they regret it. Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. Don't thank me. Just take care of your family. And Dawson? Blackwood's expression softened. I'm glad to see you found something worth living for again. Maria would have wanted that for you. The mention of his first wife should have hurt, should have filled him with guilt or shame. Instead, Dawson felt only a peaceful acceptance. Maria was part of his past, a part he'd always carry with him. But Maribel and Tessa were his future, and he was finally ready to embrace that. They left the courthouse as a family, husband, wife, and daughter. The sun was bright overhead, and the street was busy with afternoon traffic. Several people stopped to stare at them, and Dawson knew word would spread quickly about what had just transpired. "Where do we go now?" Maribel asked, holding Tessa's hand while her other hand was firmly entwined with Dawson's. "Home," Dawson said simply. "We go home." They stopped at the general store to buy supplies, proper clothes for Maribel and Tessa, food staples, a few luxuries Dawson had never bothered with when he lived alone. The storekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, congratulated them on their marriage with genuine warmth. "It's about time someone brought life back to the Reeve Ranch," she said, wrapping Tessa's new dresses in brown paper. "That place has been too quiet for too long." As they loaded their purchases onto the wagon, Dawson spotted a jewelry case in the corner of the store. Inside was a simple gold band, nothing fancy but well made. "How much for that ring?" he asked Mrs. Patterson. "The gold one? $15. It was money he couldn't really afford to spend, but Dawson bought it anyway. Outside, he caught Maribel's hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. "I know I said I didn't have a ring earlier," he said, "but you deserve one. You deserve better than this, actually, but it's a start." Maribel looked at the ring, then at him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Everything about today has been perfect." They rode out of Red Rock as the afternoon sun began its descent, heading north toward home. The journey that had been so tense and frightening that morning now felt different, lighter somehow, full of possibility instead of dread. "Papa?" Tessa's voice was drowsy. She'd been quiet since leaving town, processing everything that had happened. "Yeah, kid?" "When we get home, can I have my own room? A real room with a door and everything?" Dawson felt his chest constrict. His cabin only had one room. He'd need to build an addition, create proper space for his new family. "I'll build you the best room you've ever seen," he promised, "with a window facing east so you can watch the sunrise, and shelves for books, and anything else you want." "Can I help build it?" "Absolutely. Can't think of anyone I'd rather have helping me." Tessa smiled and settled back against him, content. Behind them, Maribel was humming softly, one of the lullabies she used to sing to her daughter. The sound carried on the desert wind, turning the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. They reached the ranch as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it, but somehow different too. Maybe it was just Dawson's perspective that had changed, but the place no longer seemed lonely or isolated. It seemed like exactly what it was: home. "It's not much," Dawson said as he helped Maribel down from the wagon. "The roof leaks when it rains hard and the floor's always dusty, and the barn door needs replacing. But it's ours now, all of ours." "It's perfect," Maribel said, the same word she'd used about the ring, "because we're here together." That night, after Tessa had fallen asleep on her makeshift bed, Dawson and Maribel sat outside and watched the stars emerge one by one. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Everything that needed saying had been said in that courthouse, in those vows they'd spoken, in the simple act of choosing each other despite all the reasons they could have walked away. "Do you think Silas Morrow will really come back?" Maribel asked eventually. "Probably. Men like that don't give up easily." Dawson pulled her closer against his side. "But we'll face it when it comes. For now, let's just enjoy this. This moment of peace. This moment of being a family. Really being one, legally and forever." Maribel tilted her head up to look at him. "Do you ever regret it, finding us in the desert? Your life was simple before we came along." "Simple isn't the same as good," Dawson said. "I was existing, not living. You and Tessa, you reminded me what it feels like to have something worth fighting for, worth living for." "We're going to be happy here," Maribel said with quiet certainty. "I know there will be hard days ahead. I know we'll have to fight for this family we're building, but we're going to be happy, Dawson. I can feel it." "Yeah," Dawson agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "We are." The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Dawson began construction on the addition to the cabin, working in the early mornings and late evenings to expand their living space. Tessa helped when she could, handing him tools and chattering constantly about everything and nothing. Maribel took over the garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn desert soil with the same determination she'd shown in everything else. Samuel and Margaret Ortiz came to visit, bringing food and congratulations and genuine happiness at seeing Dawson's transformation from solitary rancher to family man. Other neighbors followed, and slowly, the Reeve Ranch became part of the community instead of existing on its fringes. Maribel started teaching Tessa her letters properly, using a slate board Dawson had bought in town. But word got around that there was a qualified teacher at the Reeve Ranch, and soon other children were showing up for lessons. Before long, Maribel had a small school running out of the barn, with parents paying what they could, sometimes money, sometimes goods, sometimes just gratitude. 3 months after the wedding, a letter arrived from the territorial court. Silas Morrow had filed an appeal, but it had been denied. The Lane family was welcome to petition for visitation rights, the court said, but custody would remain with the adoptive parents. The case was closed. Dawson found Maribel in the garden when the letter came, showed her the official seal and the words that meant their family was safe. She read it twice, then burst into tears. The good kind, the kind that came from relief so profound it had to escape somehow. "It's really over," she said between sobs. "They can't take her. She's ours, really, truly ours." "She always was," Dawson said, holding her while she cried. "The law just finally caught up with what we already knew." That evening, they gathered as a family, the three of them, and Maribel read the letter aloud to Tessa, who was old enough to understand what it meant. "So I get to stay here forever?" Tessa asked. "With you and Papa, forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," Maribel confirmed. "This is your home now, home. You're Tessa Reeve, daughter of this family, and nothing will ever change that." Tessa threw her arms around both of them, and they held each other as the sun set outside, painting their small cabin in golden light. Later, after Tessa was asleep in her new room, the addition was finished now, with the east-facing window Dawson had promised. He and Maribel stood outside looking at the stars. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Maribel asked. "That first day in the desert, when you found us?" "I said a lot of things." "You said, 'You're coming with me, kid.' To Tessa, like it was the simplest thing in the world, deciding to save two strangers' lives." She turned to face him. "That moment changed everything. Changed all three of our lives." "I couldn't leave you there," Dawson said simply. "Once I saw you, there was never a choice. It was always going to be this." "Always?" "Always." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I didn't know it then, but I was finding my way home that day. I just didn't realize home could be two people instead of a place." They stood there under the stars, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Around them, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving, but here, in this small circle of land they'd claimed as their own, there was warmth and safety and love. Inside the cabin, Tessa stirred in her sleep and called out, not in fear or nightmare, but just checking that her parents were near. Dawson and Maribel went to her together, found her half awake in her bed. "Just making sure you were here," Tessa mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. "We're here," Dawson said softly. "We'll always be here." He meant it. After years of running from connection, of hiding from the possibility of loss, he'd finally learned that love was worth the risk. That family, messy and complicated and terrifying as it could be, was worth fighting for. 6 months later, Dawson hung a new sign across the ranch gate. Margaret had painted it for them as a housewarming gift, the letters carved deep and true into the wood. "The Reeve family, 3 hearts, 1 home." Tessa traced the letters with her finger, sounding them out carefully. She was reading well now, devouring every book Maribel could find for her. "3 hearts," she said. "That's us." "That's us," Dawson agreed, lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see the sign better. "Forever." Below them, Maribel stood with her hand shading her eyes, watching her family with a smile that never seemed to fade these days. She thought about everything they'd survived, the attack, the desert, the fever, the threat of separation. All of it had led them here, to this moment, to this family that shouldn't exist but did anyway. "Come on," she called, Dinner's ready. They walked back to the cabin together, Tessa riding high on Dawson's shoulders, Maribel's hand in his free one. Behind them, the sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, its message clear for anyone who passed by. 3 hearts, 1 home. A family built not from blood or convenience, but from choice, from courage, from the stubborn refusal to give up on each other even when the whole world seemed determined to tear them apart. The girl Dawson had found guarding her mother's body in the desert was thriving now, growing strong and confident under the protection of 2 parents who would fight heaven and earth to keep her safe. The woman he'd saved from death was flourishing, her smile coming easier, her laughter ringing through the cabin at all hours. And Dawson himself, the broken widower who'd thought his chance at family had died 7 years ago, had learned that sometimes the heart could heal if you let it. That sometimes love came back around when you were brave enough to reach for it. They were the Reeve family now. 3 hearts, 1 home. And nothing, not lawyers or distance or the harsh desert that surrounded them, would ever tear them apart again. That night, as Dawson lay beside his wife with his daughter sleeping safely in the next room, he thought about the moment that had started it all. That cry in the desert that could have been ignored, that small girl with her stick and her fierce determination, that choice to say 4 simple words that would change everything. "You're coming with me, kid." Best decision he'd ever made. The end.